This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Hey,
Howdy. How
hey.
are you, Bryan?
Doing great. You?
I'm doing okay. After last week, where I spent some time in the ER, I'm glad I'm back behind the microphone and not where I was. So
Yeah, don't do that.
welcome, welcome to Dream Idiots, everybody. This is not the continuing list of our physical ailments. This is instead a podcast where we bring each other stories, tell them to each other, and bring you along for the ride. My name is Morris. That's Bryan. And do we have any updates this week, Bryan? Or where can the folks find us? Anything new?
No updates right now. But we may have to do just like an update only episode at some point because I definitely have a few updates coming here soon-ish. I think waiting on a couple of news stories to sort of finish their lifespan. But we do appreciate you guys tagging along and listening to us each and every week. You can find us online at dreamidiots.com. We have the whole back catalog is there. We have some new merch there as well. We're on Instagram at Dream Idiots. We're on Facebook at Dream Idiots. If you have any story ideas for us that you'd like to share or curse word, you can reach out to us at dreamidiotspodcast at gmail.com. And thanks especially to those folks who have given us reviews of late. So if you don't mind, go on whichever platform you're listening to us on, shoot us 5 stars and give us a review. That helps us climb the charts and is hugely appreciated.
Yeah, we got a great review from a listener in Houston area. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. It helps us know what we're doing and what we need to get better at. So thanks. Appreciate it. Bryan, it is an odd numbered episode.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to go first. What you got for us this week?
All right. So my question for you is, do you like hippies and tree huggers?
Uh,
It's a mixed bag, mixed blessing, right?
I like tree huggers. I mean, I can take
Well,
or leave hippies, I guess.
yeah. Well, I mean, while I certainly appreciate some of the broader aspirations and motives of this part of our community, some of it is a bit, at least in my case, a bit eye rolly and tedious. Yeah, free love. By all means, object to war. Yes, be a hard ass about recycling. Maybe you don't say dude quite so much, and maybe stop with the patchouli. That stuff just smells like death. Uh, but this week on Dream Idiots, my story is sort of about the ultimate case of someone being a tree hugger. Talking about a woman named Julia Hill. Julia was born in 1974. Hill's father was a traveling minister, and as a minister, he went everywhere and took the fam in tow. When Julia is about 10 years old, she lived with her entire family. Father Dale, mother Kathy with a K, and her two brothers, Mike and Dan. She was the middle child, and they traveled all over creation in this camper. When she was 7 years old, she and her family were taking a hike one day when a butterfly landed on her finger and stayed there for the duration of the hike. And so from that day on, her nickname became Butterfly. So if you listen to this and want to find out more, just Google Julia Butterfly Hill because that's the name that she would use for the rest of her life. Definitely a little bit of the hippy dippy, moon unit Zappa, or what did Grace Slick name her kid, or something in that same vein. I forget what it
Frank
was.
Zappa hated hippies. He did.
You did?
Oh yeah.
You sure about that?
Hmm.
Okay.
Positive. Not sure why he named her Moon Unit, but he hated hippies.
So Butterfly Julia was homeschooled for much of her early life, like you do when you're a traveling minister. When the San Francisco Chronicle asked her about her childhood years later, she described feelings of social isolation. Quote, I didn't belong, I didn't fit in, I didn't understand other people. I didn't know how to relate, unquote. When Hill is in middle school, finally the family stopped traveling and they settled in, of all places, fabulous Jonesboro, Arkansas.
I've heard
Don't
of
know
it.
why. I had not heard of it. I mean, I'm sorry, but just skip Arkansas at all times. Shout out to our listeners in Arkansas. In August of 1996, she's 22 years old and she's in a pretty serious car accident. She was actually doing the right thing. She was being a designated driver for a friend who had
Oh,
been drinking, and they're driving. I'm not sure whether this was in Arkansas or somewhere else, but driving somewhere, gets hit from behind by a drunk driver. The steering wheel of the car penetrated her skull, and,
oh,
and she had to take a year off
yeah. Don't blame her.
to it should have been way longer, I would think. She had to relearn how to speak and walk and probably do everything, go to the bathroom, everything. She had to relearn. She said, uh, much later, quote, as I recovered, I realized that my whole life had been out of balance. I had graduated high school at the age of 16, so she's brilliant, and had been working nonstop since then, first as a waitress, then a restaurant manager. I had been obsessed by my career, success, material things. The crash woke me up to the importance of the moment and doing whatever I could to make a positive impact on the future. The steering wheel in my head, both figuratively and literally, steered me in a new direction in my
Ooh.
in my life. After I'm released from my last doctor, I went on a road trip with friends, which led me to California and to the redwoods. She said later that she felt an instant connection to the redwood trees in Northern California. So she travels to Eureka, California, connects with a bunch of activists who are working and living and protesting in the area at the time. And she learns of a chance to participate in a tree sit. So there's a 1,000-year-old tree named Luna, and she's there initially with two other people. This initiative is sponsored by Earth First, a well-known group that shared her
Uh-huh.
passion for basically environmental causes all over the world. But certainly redwoods would be in their wheelhouse. The group is all about preserving the trees, and they were sort of looking for volunteers to take the first shift. And even though she was new to this type of activism, she kind of stepped up. According to Swarthmore College later on, they said Hill's goals were, quote, to protect Luna, to slow down logging in the area, and to raise awareness in the broad base of the public. So the three of them actually go up. She's one of the first three to volunteer to sit in Luna. Luna is 150, I'm sorry, 180 feet tall,
Wow.
and is over 1,000 years old. She goes up to the tree, and they don't. It's not like they're hanging out in the lower boughs of the tree. They go to the top of this tree. But she gets up there, and she comes down with some illness, and fairly quickly has to descend. But she quickly returns to the tree. The other two have to leave, so she heads back. And she ascends the tree again on December 10th, 1997. Because it was getting some press, she used a solar powered cell phone for radio interviews and became the quote in tree correspondent for various cable news shows, hosted TV crews to protest old growth clear cutting, and basically used ropes and paint buckets, as far as I can tell from pictures, to hoist up supplies to keep warm. She wrapped herself incredibly tight in, it said a sleeping bag, maybe more than one, leaving only just basically a hole for breathing. And she did have one single burner propane stove, so she could have hot meals. And she dealt with freezing rain, 40-mile-an-hour winds. This coincided with a fairly bad El Nino that year. So not a great place to be. So before you started, I sent you a picture. You want to fire that picture up?
Sure. Yoink. Oh, wow.
So this is 25 plus years ago. This is before drones where you get really really close clear photos. I'm not sure how that photo was taken, but that is taken from a height of maybe 300 feet. It's obviously above her. You can see this little speck of blue. That's her on her little platform way up on top of this tree.
Oh my God.
And I'll put that photo in the notes for the episode.
Well, Brian, she
So
probably got altitude sickness the first time. She didn't acclimate. Look how high up she is. My God.
right, if she fell off of there, she wouldn't get hurt. She'd miss the earth, right? Uh, So initially, Earth First is involved and are supporting her with resources, but eventually she's up there for a while, no longer getting the press and results that I guess that they like. Earth First pulls the resources, so it's kind of unclear why that happens. So even though Earth First kind of lost their enthusiasm for it, Julia did not. She stays up there. She has initially just one friend who is ascending to the tree to give her supplies, probably help with morale, bring food, schlepping down stuff that needs to be thrown away, etc. According to the LA Times, at the time, the Pacific Lumber Company responded to this tactic with basically with intimidation. We're going to scare the crap out of this woman. So they start flying helicopters nearby. They're cutting down ropes from nearby trees. At one point in time, they started stationing security guards at the bottom of the tree and would prevent folks from going up to help her. Basically, just being gigantic assholes in virtually every respect. So at one point, she actually survives a windstorm with winds up to 70 miles an hour. It lasted
God.
for 16 hours. It ripped the tarps off the off the top of the shelter. All the while, I mean, she's on what it kind of appeared to be just wooden pallets. They're two. In one account it says 4x6 platforms. Another account says 6x6 foot platforms. So she's in a tiny space, just balancing up there. On a conversation recorded later with the San Francisco Chronicle, the paper reported that this is, quote, an exceedingly hostile environment for human beings. And the writer, a guy named Glenn Martin, said that her living conditions were cramped and wet, and, quote, Hill was never truly dry during her 2 years in Luna.
Two
She was up,
years.
she was up there for 2 years. She learned survival tricks up there, he went on, such as seldom washing the soles of her feet because the sap helped her feet stick better to the branches. Eventually, after many months, a group of 5 men kind of served as her ongoing support system, delivering essentials. They would schlep stuff up 2 or 3 times a week, bring food, bring fuel for her stove, bring mail, bring extra batteries for the cell phone. And occasionally some other protesters would show up and join her on her platform, or maybe at a separate platform. I'm not sure. But she was basically there by herself. Most of her contact was with the wildlife around her. She said later, quote, I did my best not to tame them, but the flying squirrels found every food morsel I dropped. They knew that the second the candle went out, that was the time to make as much of a mess as possible and tap dance on my head. So she goes to bed. It's pitch black, and all of a sudden the critters come out trying to scoop up whatever she's left behind. So she's up there. Weeks pass, months pass, but she does have a cell phone, and she probably gets great. That's a great connection. So she's able to talk to folks and does interviews, and she's definitely able to stay in touch with folks and find out what the hell's going on. Finally, December of '99, exactly 2 years later, 738 days later,
Good Lord.
she finally, they come to an agreement with the Pacific Lumber Company to preserve Luna. So there is an agreement that's reached called the Luna Preservation Agreement that protects Luna and everything within a 200-foot radius, which includes many, many other trees that are nearly as big, as you can tell from that photo. Basically, the agreement stipulated that any trees that had already been felled could be processed, could be hauled off by the company, but any tree still upright wouldn't be touched. And so when that agreement was signed, um, Hill comes down from Luna after 738 days. Not quite 10 years later, 2007, the Pacific Lumber Company files for bankruptcy because of all of the new environmental regulations that go into into place. While she's up there, she founds a group called Circle of Life, California-based organization that teaches people to live more environmentally, and they have all kinds of training programs about preservation. There's a 2000 documentary called Butterfly, which I believe is on Netflix, that kind of tells her whole story. And she wrote a book that came out the same year called The Legacy of Luna, the story of a tree, a woman, and the struggle to save the redwoods, all about her experience camping at the top of the tree. She's basically, you know, isn't actively involved in any activism anymore. In May 2006, she did something a little bit similar. She sat in some scaffolding in a tree sit-in in Los Angeles to protest the upcoming bulldozing of basically a neighborhood farm in South Central LA, and was joined by Daryl Hannah and Joan Baez. But that
Wow.
one failed. That farm was ultimately bulldozed, and those farmers had to move to other locations in LA. But anyway, Julia Butterfly Hill, one person who's way more committed to her activism than I am. And happily she didn't fall out of that damn
Oh
tree.
my God. Was her book made out of paper? Just curious. Okay. That's an incredible story. I can't believe I've never heard of that. That's
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years in a tree. Um, and she must have exceptional equilibrium.
Uh, Exceptional something. My God.
Right.
Wonder if she ever got her feet clean. What you do? Acid? Would you paint thinner? What do you do to get that off? I don't know what you do.
Vinegar? I don't know.
She's got hobbit feet coming down. It's
Right. 2 inches of dry, cruddy sap.
okay. Julia Butterfly Hill. That is a remarkable story, Brian.
There you
I
go.
have never heard of her. What a badass.
Yeah, very cool. And younger than us, younger than either one of us.
Well, let's not bring that into it. So, from the sublime to the ridiculous, do we have a curse word of the week?
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
Because I've collected so many of them, and I'm not going through them fast enough, I'm offering you two this week. So first one
Two.
falls into the category of words that sound like they're curse words, sound like they're nasty, but in fact, it is not. So the first one is a word. Sorry, I start reading it and I start laughing. Is the word coming tonight? CUMMINGTONITE. One word. Any idea?
Okay. None.
No, and I'm betting you don't want to try. Coming tonight is a mineral. It's actually it's a stone made up
Uh,
of iron and magnesium. That's really really badly named. They really should have named it literally anything else.
so I
But
guess the guy who found it or gal was Cummington.
yeah, it was either coming or it was found near the town of Cummington. I don't know, but yeah, this is like when we discussed many months ago the town of Shitterton. No, why do you do this? You shouldn't do this. Shouldn't do things like that. Name it literally anything else. And then the second one I have for you is a word that you can use to test out. Let's say you're in front of someone who you suspect might be Scottish, but they claim that they're not Scottish. One way to test if they're Scottish is to ask them to say the expression "purple burglar alarm"
Purple
because
burglar alarm. Okay.
they can't say it. And here's a good example.
There's some Scottish people that kind of say purple burglar alarm, 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 burglar, purple burglar.
So that is a YouTuber posted by a YouTuber named Limmy, that because Scottish has
With Chevy Equinox
has that weird kind of hard rolled R like Spanish almost does.
Right.
And purple in case you can't say, he tried it like 6 times. He can't get purple burglar alarm out.
The Scottish test. I like that. Thank you, Brian. One
See,
is ridiculous, one is sublime. I'll let you folks decide which is which. That is great. Thanks for the curse words of the week. Okay, Brian. My turn.
You're up.
Brian, what's the worst car you've ever owned?
The worst car I ever owned by a
Mhm.
large margin was a 1986, I think, Hyundai.
And what did you hate about it? Did you have trouble getting into it? You're a tall fella.
No, but it was just a complete lemon, breaking down all the time, complete shit. I think it had 12 horsepower, garbage car.
I had a used 86 Audi that
I
would have been a
remember.
great if the great car if the person who had owned it before me had taken care of it. The oil had never been changed when I bought it in 1992.
After how many miles?
I don't know.
Had
I
never
don't
been
remember.
changed.
That's what because I asked them because I was having trouble with it. I said, "When's the last time you changed the oil?" You have to change the oil. Um, yeah, I think we've all, for those of us who are car folks, we've all had a bad car.
Mhm.
I am a Subaru guy. I do live in Colorado, and it's against the law to not own a Subaru if you're driving. So I am a Subaru guy from way back, and I love them. I'll drive them. But I'd like to talk to you today about a worst cars list written by a guy named Dan Neal. Dan Neal won the Pulitzer for his writing in 2004, and his talent shines through in an article from Time magazine titled The 50 Worst Cars of All Time. And I'm going to share his thoughts on 13 of them because I like the number 13. It's a prime number, and prime numbers are cool. These are not his order. He did them by years. I have put them in order of how great I think his writing is.
Okay,
So
great.
let's go. And I'll be reading his stuff verbatim. So I am quoting Mr. Dan Neal this entire time.
Okay.
Ryan, you ever heard of a Scripps Booth by Autogo from
No.
1913? Neal writes, a 3,200-pound motorcycle, a V8 engine, and enough copper tubing to provide every hillbilly in the Ozarks with a still. The Scripps Booth by Autogo was the daft experiment of James Scripps Booth, an heir to the Scripps publishing fortune and a self-taught or untaught auto engineer. The by Autogo was essentially a two-wheeled vehicle carrying its considerable heft on 37-inch wooden wheels. At slow speeds, the driver could lower small wheels on outriggers to stabilize the vehicle so it wouldn't plop over. Little training wheels, little bitty training wheels. This is not the case of the advantage of hindsight. This was obviously a crazy idea even in 1913. The by Autogo does enjoy the historical distinction of being the first V8 powered vehicle ever built in Detroit. So you could argue it's the beginning of an even greater folly. Number 12 from 1970. And if you're a car person or have any kind of pet, you know this one was going to show up. The AMC Gremlin.
Mhm.
American Motors designer Richard Teague was responsible for some of the coolest cars of the era. The Gremlin wasn't one of them. AMC was profoundly in the weeds at the time, and the Gremlin was the company's attempt to beat Ford and GM to the subcompact punch. To save time and money, Teague's design team basically whacked off the rear of the AMC Hornet with a cleaver. The result was one of the most curiously proportioned cars ever, with a long, low snout, long front overhang, and a truncated tail, like one snapped off a salamander. Cheap and incredibly deprived, with vacuum-operated windshield wipers, no less. The Gremlin was also awful to drive, with a heavy six-cylinder motor and choppy, unhappy handling due to the loss of suspension in the back. The Gremlin was quicker than the other subcompacts, but alas, that only meant you heard the jeers and laughter that much sooner.
Vacuum powered wipers? How the hell would that work?
I'm picturing someone just trying to. Number 11, the Overland Auto
No idea.
from
Eight
1911.
tires?
Milton Reeves had a very hard head and apparently very poor eyesight. While the general conformation of the automobile was largely sorted out in the first decade of the 20th century, particularly that bit about four wheels, Reeves thought perhaps 8 or a minimum of 6 wheels might provide a smoother ride. Welding in some bits to a 1910 Overland and adding 2 more axles and 4 more wheels, Reeves created the Octo Auto, proudly displaying it in the inaugural Indianapolis 500. The car was a bit of a monster, measuring over 20 feet long. 0 orders for the patently ugly and silly Octa Auto apparently didn't discourage Reeves, who tried again the next year with the Sext Auto. Not as fun as it sounds, just 6 wheels. Reeves is remembered today as the inventor of, this is just to show you that, even great builders he invented the muffler. This is the man who gave us the muffler.
Right.
Okay, so number 10, the Chrysler Imperial LeBaron 2-door hardtop from 1971. Oh boy. The glamorous Imperial mark was by the late 60s reduced to a trashy pseudo-luxury harlot walking the streets for its pimp, the Chrysler Corporation. By 1971, only the Imperial LeBaron was left, and it shared the monstrous slab-sided fuselage styling of corporate siblings like the Chrysler New Yorker and the Dodge Monaco. Appearing to have been hewn from solid blocks of mediocrity, the Imperial LeBaron 2-door is memorable for having some of the longest fenders in history. It was powered by Chrysler's silly big 440 cubic inch V8 and measured over 19 feet long. Hang on, I got to. The interior looked like a third world casino. Here we are approaching the nadir of American car building, obese, under-engineered, and horribly ugly. Or it would be the nadir, except for the abysmal 1980 Chrysler Imperial, which had an engine cursed by God. The Imperial name was finally overthrown in 1983. Number 9. Fans of Breaking Bad will no doubt recognize this car, the Pontiac Aztek from 2001. I was in the audience at the Detroit Auto Show the day GM unveiled the Pontiac Aztek, and I will never forget the gasp the audience made. Holy hell, this car could not have been more instantly hated if it had a swastika tattoo on its forehead. In later interviews with GM designers, it emerged that the Aztek design had been fiddled with, fussed over, cost-shaved, and otherwise compromised until the tough, cool-looking concept had been reduced to a bulky, plastic-clad mess. A classic case of losing the plot. The Aztek violates one of the principal rules of car design. We like cars that look like us. With its multiple eyes and supernumerary nostrils, the Aztek looks deformed and scary, something that dogs bark at and cathedrals employ to ring bells. The shame is, under all that ugliness, there was a useful, competent crossover. Let's hop over the pond a bit for the Peel Trident of 1966. Less a car than a fifth-grade science project on seed germination, the Peel Trident was designed and built on the Isle of Man in the 1960s for reasons as yet undetermined, kind of like Stonehenge. The Trident was the evolution of the P50, which at 4 feet 2 inches in length could easily justify its claim as the world's smallest car or the fastest bar stool. The Trident is a good example of why all those futuristic bubble-top cars of GM's Motorama period would never work. The sun would cook you alive under the plexiglass. We in the car business call the phenomenon solar gain. You have to love the heroic name. Trident! More like doofus on the half shell. Brian, did you know anybody who owned a bitchin' Camaro in the 80s? I knew a couple guys that had Camaros.
Camaros or Firebird was always sort of in the same family.
Yep, that's going to come up in this next one. From 1982, pardon me, the Camaro Iron Duke. I had never even heard of this model. There was a time when 90 horsepower was a lot, and that time was 1932. 50 years later, it was bupkis, especially under the hood of Chevy's beloved Mustang fighter, the Camaro. As the base engine for the redesigned 82 Camaro and Pontiac Firebird, the 2.5-liter four-cylinder Iron Duke was the smallest, least powerful, most un-Camaro-like engine that could be. And it was connected to a low-tech 3-speed slush box. So equipped, the Iron Duke had 0 to 60 miles per hour acceleration of around 20 seconds, which left Camaro owners to drum their fingers while school buses rocketed past in a blur of yellow. Okay, number 6 is the eldest on our list. Brian, you ever heard of a horsey horseless?
No.
Somewhere between an early car and the head in the bed scene in The Godfather, the horsey horseless, the brain fart of inventor Uriah Smith of Battle Creek, Michigan, was intended to soothe the skittish nerves of her equine servants. A wooden horse head was attached to the front of the chuffing buggy in order to make it resemble a horse and carriage. Smith recommended the horse head be hollow to contain volatile fuel, another great idea. Quoting Smith, "The live horse would be thinking of another horse," said Smith, "and before he could discover his error and see that he had been fooled, the strange carriage would have passed." Stupid horse. It's not clear if the horsey horseless was ever actually built or if it's a chimera of auto history, but it reminds us just what a radical, hard to conceptualize thing a horseless carriage was. That's a very good point. Bryan, there's been a car that you knew was going to show up on the list, and it actually has a link to your story from earlier. The Chevy Corvair from 1961. Heard of this car?
Mm-hmm.
This is a very famous car, right? Rear engine cars are fun to drive and even more fun to crash. While rear engine packaging offers enormous advantages, putting the vehicle's heaviest component behind the rear axle gives cars a distinct tendency to spin out, sort of like an arrow weighted at the end. During World War II, Nazi officers in occupied Czechoslovakia were banned from driving the speedy rear engine Tatras because so many of them had been killed behind the wheel. Chevrolet execs knew the Corvair, a lithe and lovely car with an air-cooled flat six in the back, a la the VW Beetle, was a handful, but they declined to spend the few dollars per car to make the swing axle rear suspension more manageable. Oh, they came to regret that. Ralph Nader put the smackdown on GM in his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, also noting that the Corvair's single-piece steering column could impale the driver in a front collision. In Julie Hill's case, the head, most people in the chest. Yep.
Right.
Ouch. Meanwhile, the Corvair had other problems. It leaked oil like a derelict tanker. Its heating system tended to pump noxious fumes into the cabin. It was offered for a short while with a gasoline burner heater located in the front trunk, a common but dangerously dumb accessory at the time. Number 4. Is there a particular model that hasn't shown up yet that you've been waiting for, Bryan? Because here's one everyone should know.
You mentioned a Gremlin. I'm trying
this one's from 1958.
No, the other one. Shoot, I'm spacing it. There are two that I keep thinking are gonna show up. The Pacer.
I can't remember if the Pacer was on his list or not. It doesn't.
Okay.
I don't talk about the Pacer here. Yeah.
Okay. And then technically my first car was the Dodge Dart.
Oh, the Dodge Dart's not on the list either.
Damn.
Yeah, for some reason, yeah. The one I'm talking about right now is 1958's Ford Edsel. And he starts his writing with, "That's why we're all here, right? To celebrate E-Day, the date 50 years ago when Ford took one of Autumn's most hilarious pratfalls. But why? It really wasn't that bad a car. True, the car was kind of homely, fuel-thirsty, and too expensive, particularly at the outset of the late 50s recession. But what else? It was this first victim of Madison Avenue hyperhype. Ford's marketing mavens had led the public to expect some plutonium-powered pancake-making wonder car. What they got was a Mercury. Cultural critics speculated that the car was a flop because the vertical grille looked like a vagina. How did Edsel come to be synonymous with failure? All of the above consolidated into an irrational groupthink and pressurized by a joyously catty media. Interestingly, it was Ford President Robert McNamara who convinced the board to bail out of the Edsel project. A decade later, it was McNamara, then Secretary of Defense, who couldn't bring himself to quit the disaster of Vietnam, even though he knew a lemon when he saw one.
Right.
Okay. This is the Renault Dauphine from 1956. The most ineffective bit of French engineering since the Maginot line, the Renault Dauphine was originally to be named the Corvette. Très ironie. It was, in fact, a rickety, paper-thin, scandalable car. If you stood beside it, you could actually hear it rusting. Its most salient feature was its slowness, a rate of acceleration you could measure with a calendar. It took the drivers of Road and Track 32 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. which would put the Dauphine at severe disadvantages in any drag race involving farm equipment. The fact that the ultra-cheap, super sketchy Dauphine sold 2 million copies around the world is an index of how desperately people wanted cars. Any cars. Number 2. The Trabant from 1975. This is the car that gave communism a bad name. Powered by a 2-stroke pollution generator that maxed out at an ear-splitting 18 horsepower, the Trabant was a hollow lie of a car constructed of recycled worthlessness. Actually, the body was made of a fiberglass like Duroplast, reinforced with recycled fibers like cotton and wood. A virtual antique when it was designed in the 1950s. The Trabant was East Germany's answer to the Volkswagen Beetle, a people's car, as if the people didn't have enough to worry about. Trabants smoked like an Iraqi oil fire when they ran at all and often lacked even the most basic of amenities, like brake lights and turn signals. But history's been kind to the Trabi. Thousands of East Germans drove their Trabants over the border when the wall fell, which made it kind of an automotive liberator. Once across the border, the none too sentimental Deutschlanders immediately abandoned their cars. Ach, bin junk. And the number 1 on the list, from 1976, the Aston Martin Lagonda. In the disco days of the 1970s, even supercars were cocaine thin. Meet the Aston Martin Lagonda, a 4-door exotic that lived on dinner mints and hot water. Designed by Aston Martin penman William Towns, undoubtedly wearing a very large cravat at the time. The Lagonda was as beautiful as a car as ever resembled a pencil box. Mechanically, it was a catastrophe. Aston Martin's Dunkirk. The company decided to build the Lagonda with a brace of cutting-edge computer-driven electronics and cathode ray displays, which would have been very impressive if any of them ever worked. NASA couldn't have built this car, much less the heirs to Joseph Lucas, the British electronics famous Prince of Darkness. And that refers to Lucas lights. My dad used to make fun of them all the time, where basically the head beams would fall off right after the bumper. You could see as far as your front bumper. And then those are my 13 picks from his list. A really fun writer and a fun article
hilarious.
From time.com, the 50 worst cars of all time, April 25th, 2017, Dan Neal and Time staff.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had bad cars, but I don't think I've had one anywhere near as bad as anything listed on that.
Yeah, my Hyundai was definitely bad, and then the Dodge Dart I had for a period of time. I don't know why this. I mean, the Dodge Dart I called my mafia staff car because it comfortably sat, 6 or 8 in bench seats.
I remember
And
your
then-
Dart, yeah.
And then the under the hood, I don't know why the hood was so big because you could lift the hood and there all the space where you could see the ground below it because the engine was just a straight 4, but it was so simple. Like why? I mean, this hood could be half the size. Why is this thing so immense? And it was that mine didn't do it. But someone else I know had the same vintage, a '60s Dodge Dart, where the radio would turn off and you stop driving. So if you slowed down for a red light, the radio volume was aggravating as hell.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was also the kind of guy that, if he could spend $10 to save a buck, he would do it if he could keep the car running. Just reached a point with some of my cars where like, I'm not the time and the money that would go into fixing the Audi, which I mean, you got to rebuild the engine. I'm not doing that in college.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
Right. Throw it away. Right.
Yes. All right. Well, there we go. Another one in the books.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks. We appreciate you tagging along. Please give us 5 stars. Shoot us a review on whichever platform you're on. Check us out at dreamidiots.com, Facebook, and Instagram at Dream Idiots. And drop us a line if you'd like at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. We appreciate it.
Yes, indeed. And be good to each other.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong.
Mhm.
Brian.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.